Hi, this is Mike from Picture Me Coding. Today, we present the second episode in our hard-hitting true crime series, where we expose the outlaws and miscreants who abuse the internet for nefarious purposes. Or, sometimes just dudes who are really into Naruto. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mull. Hi, Mike. How you doing this week?
Doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about the guest we have this week, Mike. Today we have Scott Aker. No relation to Eric Aker. That's a lie, actually. Scott's my uncle, and he's got a story that he told me, and I was excited that he was willing to come on and share it with us. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
Scott, would you tell Mike a little bit about your background working in our industry?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my first job out of college, I was in this program for a financial company called, it was a management training program. And I got my bachelor's in economics. And the program essentially allowed you to rotate through different departments of this financial company. And the intention was you either were doing the work of that department, or maybe the manager or director of the department had some special project for you to work on. And you do that for 4 months and you move on to another one. And it was a 2-year program. I requested and was lucky enough to get moved into the IT program, or IT department, because it seemed interesting to me. Even though I really had never seen a personal computer until I started working. Never had one in college. It was just before that time.
What's the year we're talking about, roughly?
This would be 1988, maybe. So I showed up at the IT department on the first day. I was assigned this manager. I sat across the way from him in my cubicle. He introduced himself when I got there in the morning. He had a couple memos in his hand, handed them to me. He said, read these memos. I have a meeting. I'll be back and we'll discuss your projects. And I didn't see him again for 2 weeks. So that was kind of the set the stage for the rest of my rotation there. Nothing to do and nothing assigned to me. But I was in a cubicle with a bunch of programming manuals. And so I started reading programming manuals. And then I started making some little programs and doing some coding. And then by the end of my 4-month rotation, one of the other managers came by and was looking at what I was doing and said, hey, we have a position for a junior programmer. Do you want it? And I said, sure. Because the intention was to get hired out of the management training program at some point.
What was the programming language you were using at the time?
Oh, boy. This is something that you probably maybe never heard of, but it's essentially, it was DBase.
I bet Mike's heard of it.
I am that old, yes.
And they were using a program or a compiler for DBase called Clipper. I don't know if you've heard of that. And so this is before relational databases also. So, so we wrote programs in DBase language, essentially, and compiled them with Clipper. And they went against a database, but not a relational database. So that's how I kind of got into software development. It was through, I guess, bad management. I got into software development.
As so many of us have. So the story you have for us, you later went to work for a company. And I find the story compelling because today, public cloud usage it's just ubiquitous in our industry. It's totally common for us to spin up VMs on cloud servers, on cloud platforms. And it's almost hard to remember a time before, well, for me, before that was ubiquitous. Yeah. And the history of that, there's this kind of frenzied history. It went from I'm renting a rack in a in a server room, maybe in a data center. I'm paying for that too. Maybe I'm paying somebody to host some service for me, and now suddenly we're going to be renting out compute, and that is like a pretty quick little transition, I think. So I'm really interested in this company that you went to work for. Now, we're not going to name the company, but what they did and what it was like working there, and what their products were.
Yeah, so it was a, I don't know if you would still call it this today, but at the time they called it infrastructure as a service. And essentially it was a competitor of Amazon Web Services. I think at the time there might have been, other than Amazon and this company I was working for, they were pretty early in it. I'm not sure other companies that were kind of in the space. Maybe some companies were getting in there, but not quite there. They hosted a bunch of physical servers, big physical servers that ran a virtualization platform or called Zen, which was an open source one. Their customers can come in through a website and select servers to spin up, or they could do it through a REST API, or they could do it through this UI. And so the company I was working for, one of their claim to fame was that they had the UI that allowed users to do this. Whereas at the time when they first got into it, Amazon, it was a command line. So it wasn't that user friendly.
About what year are we talking now?
This is, so I started working for them in 2008 as a consultant. I think they had come out with their platform maybe 1 or 2 years before that. So it was probably 2006, 2007.
Yeah, I really think that's right at the beginning. I was looking at the history of AWS, and they didn't offer EC2 in beta until 2006, and they didn't GA it until 2008. So that's right at the beginning.
Were they a cloud provider from the get-go, or was it something that started out like as a colo?
Yeah, they were a colo. They provided, physical servers. They didn't own, co-locations. They leased it. You were able to, request and get a server, and they would bring it up. But these were physical servers at the time, and they did that under a different name than the virtualization platform.
So it sounds pretty cool. So they have a web portal. You can spin up virtual machines on the web portal. But what was it like for you actually working there? What was the experience like working there?
Well, so this company was kind of like some other companies I'd worked for. Somehow I always got mixed up in these companies that they were kind of coming out of startup mode and they were trying to be a real quote unquote company. Sometimes it's because they wanted to go public or they wanted to grow or get more investors. And, there's all these issues when these companies, I haven't worked for, I've been an independent consultant for a number of years now, so I haven't really worked for a company for quite some time. But, back in the day in 2008 or even before that, 2000s, these startups, you're just trying to get up as quickly as possible, so they have typically one system admin who brought up servers and there was absolutely no security. Everybody in the company could get in. Everything was installed on the server by default. Nothing got patched. By this time in my career, I'd have these roles as, either director of IT or, like engineering director. And a lot of times my responsibility was kind of make it a real company or make it look more like a real company. And so that a lot of times involved taking away server access from a lot of people, usually the engineers themselves would get onto the servers and, do whatever, install whatever they wanted. And it sometimes was kind of painful for myself and for the people that were there. And this company was kind of like that. I was originally brought in to help with their software engineering processes, because I'd run some groups in the past, which at the time we called engineering services, but today is called DevOps. Supporting engineering, supporting the builds, supporting the environments for development and tests and that sort of thing, and building out those things. So I was originally brought in to do that work for them. because they really had no experience with that. The software engineering for the company was run. The VP of software engineering was a guy that was a system admin for their previous company. So he had really no software engineering experience. He'd been doing it for a couple of years and he'd learned a lot, but that wasn't his background.
So just to try to sympathize a little bit. So you go from system admin style where you're racking servers, spinning them up. You're going to use them for a long time, typically at that time, to more of a cloud offering, and you need a little more flexibility. But it's hard you have to invent all that, right? It sort of doesn't exist. So what you're saying is they were sort of trying to move fast and spin things up, but they hadn't really they didn't build processes to make it easier on themselves, it sounds like.
Their initial offering was using another virtualization platform, which I can't remember what it was really called, but they had done all this software to interact with with the initial virtualization software that they were using on their servers. And as soon as they went live, the thing just completely fell over. And so they were just like, and this was before I was there. This is just stuff I'd heard. So they were just scrambling to this is, you're going out with a virtualization offering and the virtualization software platform you're using, doesn't work. I mean, that's a major part of your offering. You got to tear out. And they, I think they did it in a matter of like days or weeks, completely switched to Zen platform and had to write all of the software layer to interact with it. It was, it was a mess, but they had.
It sounds stressful. Was it stressful?
Well, I wasn't there when this happened, but yeah, in general, the company was a pretty stressful place to work at. You'd have periods of calm, but then, when things went wrong, it got really stressful really quick. And I think, that's kind of why looking back at my career, I don't know why I got in these roles where I was directing ops, network engineers and system engineers, because I really had not that much experience. I had zero experience in networking.
Oh. And did you find that it was hard to kind of establish credibility with those people without that experience?
Yeah, it could be, but I think a lot of times I kind of got handed these roles because I'm just generally a pretty calm person. So when shit is falling over and things are happening, I tend to be pretty calm. I don't know, maybe people look at that as it looks like I know what I'm doing.
My favorite people in ops. My favorite people in ops are the ones who are super calm when things are going badly.
But
no, you said you came in as a consultant and then something happened, like they shook up the people who were there and then you got handed a lot more responsibility. So what was that? What happened there?
So, as helping with this DevOps, I was interacting a lot with the guy that directed the operations, had the system admins and the network engineers reporting to him because I needed servers to do things that I needed to do for my projects. He wasn't a very responsive guy. He was this French guy that was really into handball and would go on these handball. You know what handball is? It's not the thing where you're hitting the ball with your hand, but it's kind of almost like a volleyball size thing. It's almost like soccer with your hands instead of your feet. It's very popular. It's very popular in Europe.
It's an Olympic sport.
Is that what it's called? Handball?
It is.
Yeah, it's team handball. They played in the Olympics.
Yeah. So he would go on these handball tournaments. He was part of a team. And one time he was gone on this tournament and he was supposed to have brought up all these servers for a software release that needed to support the software release, and he just didn't do it. And when he came back, the VP of engineering fired him in a fit of rage and then turned to me and said, "Hey, Scott, can you take over this role temporarily?" I was like, "Sure."
Were you into that because the VP of engineering just fired somebody in a fit of rage? Were you thinking, uh-oh?
Well, no, I was there to help out, so I was trying to help out. But the role turned into like pretty much 100% of my time because and the DevOps stuff kind of went by the wayside. They also had some pretty good DevOps people there, so they were able to kind of just run with it on their own.
Now, I want to get to, so one of the reasons we wanted you on to tell us the story is there's actually a crime that occurred that I want to get to. I want you to tell us about. But it might be helpful to know maybe a little more some of the technical underpinnings of how things were implemented there. Do you think so? Is that going to help us out to understand it at all? Or
yeah, so the offering consisted of a front end, this UI, and there's a REST API. The front end was written in Java, and I think it had Java server pages, if I'm correct there. And then that talked to a lower layer that interacted. So just to step back a little bit, the Java had an Oracle database that had all of the accounts for the people who have signed up, did the billing, pools of IP addresses that were assigned to users when they spun up servers. One of the I mentioned before, one of the kind of things that was a differentiation for this company was that they had the first UI. But one of the other things that customers really liked is when you signed up, you got assigned your own VLAN. And so with a whole pool of IP addresses. And so that was something that people really liked as well. But that also created, some headaches for the platform, especially the ops, in terms of the number of VLANs that can be run by, network equipment at the time, or, there was a hard limit of the number of VLANs that a network could assign.
So there's kind of a scalability restriction there.
And they definitely hit those limits. So the front end, the Oracle database with all the customer information, talked to a lower layer that did things like figure out what nodes were available. And when I say nodes, the nodes were the large physical servers with, huge amount of RAM and maxed out CPUs. That then the Zen platform also split the CPUs into virtual CPUs. So you had, all these CPUs, virtual and physical, on each one of these nodes. So it would keep track of where the nodes are, how many VMs are running on each node, where the capacity was, so that if anybody wanted to spin up a new server, this layer would figure out where to deploy that server.
So it's like a scheduler.
It was a scheduler, yeah, and communicate with all the LAN equipment, put in DNS entries for the servers, that sort of thing. And this layer was this is the layer that was torn out and completely rewrote when the initial virtualization platform fell over, when the offering was first put out there. And so it was rewritten very quickly, I think in a matter of days, using Perl by a guy who was very smart, but he no longer worked at the company. So you had, this whole layer that, they had developers that were working on it that maintained it, but I don't think they knew it as deeply as they should have. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And it worked pretty well. It worked well. By the time I had left the company, I would say all of it had been rewritten in Python. So this layer would communicate with all that and do all the deployment of the servers and that sort of thing.
That sounds super interesting. Mike, did you have any questions? You want to fill in any details here in your thinking?
I'm assuming at this point in history, this was more or less strictly virtual machines. There probably weren't any other services that they offered.
Well, so it was mostly virtual machines, but you could also request and get a physical machine as well that would be added to your network. There was also a cloud storage offering as well.
Okay.
And there were some other offerings, that I can't. I think you can get some firewall, in your network, some other things like that.
That's really interesting. It was right at the beginning of AWS. If this company had taken off, we might be using their services instead of AWS, potentially.
Yeah, I think, AWS was just, it's the behemoth, right? It just had so much behind it, and unlimited money. Pretty hard to compete with, even at that time.
If you wanted to run like MySQL or something like that, you probably had to spin up a VM and start up your own MySQL instance.
Yeah. So there was another kind of group of engineering that maintained the server images that were allowed to be spun up. And those were different flavors of Linux, and different versions of Windows. And that just doing that, maintaining those things and those images was a pretty big job as well, and involved a lot of. Sometimes we had some issues with bad images being deployed out there and caused wreaking havoc. But so that was another kind of engineering group.
So once an end user had spun up a machine or spun up a server, did they SSH to it? Did they telnet to it? Or how do they get into the machine as an end user?
Each physical node had like 3 networks attached to it. They had a public network or a network that the customer could use as a public network. They had a admin network that the customer could use just to get in, to the servers to administer them. And then we had our own network so that we used to put the image, send the images through and that sort of thing onto the nodes. So, they would SSH or however, they wanted to get into it.
Now, Scott, there was a crime that occurred. I guess we could start with how did it get? What was discovered that led to this?
Well, so the initial billing system for the offering was not very good, and customers would often regularly contact the tech support group and say, they're being charged for CPU or memory that they didn't use. And oftentimes the tech support people could figure it out and they'd get credited back. Or if they sometimes couldn't figure it out, it would come to the engineering department, and the software engineer that worked on that part of the system would usually have to look into the database and, poke around and figure out what happened. And 99% of the times they figure out what happened, and they either get credited back their money or they determine it was a valid charge. So that's kind of how this crime got discovered. The engineer, and it was fairly routine, got a request from tech support to look into this billing issue. Some customers saying they got billed for CPUs or servers that they weren't using. And he was looking and couldn't really figure out what the issue was. It was different from the issues he's seen in the past. And eventually he figured out that by just, poking around the database, that the data that was in the database, it's just not possible for that data to be in that database based on the way the code works, right? Although he wasn't absolutely sure, he came to the VP of engineering, who I think then pulled in me, and said that I think we've been hacked because there's just no way this data could be in this database like this. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how it got started.
So that sounds a little scary. So far, you got VP of engineering, you're involved. Who else was involved in this?
At first, it was just the engineer that discovered it, myself, the VP of engineering, and then I had one of my, by this time, I had hired a pretty senior system admin who was very good. So I brought him in as well. We kind of poked around a little bit more, and we were able to determine, the virtual servers that were generating the charges to this other customer. At that point kind of confirmed that, somebody got in. Somebody got in and spun up servers, and through not through the UI, through some other means.
So somebody's stealing compute and they are pinning it on one of your customers. They're making it look like one of your customers.
Yeah, I think they probably just found some other customer account and figured out the structure of the database and said, make the billing go here.
Now, your story is surprising to me because you got the FBI involved. How did that work?
That was really strange. We were it was pretty early, maybe within the same day that we discovered that this had happened. Somehow, I think it was the VP of sales found out about it or got involved because, we were starting to kind of think, oh, maybe we need some, marketing, if we need to figure out what the marketing or, if we have to talk to customers about this, that sort of thing.
Right. You might have to tell your customers, we got hacked. Sorry. Check your account, that type of stuff.
But I think it was the VP of sales had a previous job, either worked with or for the federal government and somehow had connections with either directly with the FBI or knew people who had connections with the FBI. But in any case, within maybe the same day, by the end of the day, we had 3 or 4 FBI agents with, guns on their hips, walking around the engineering department from the San Francisco, FBI office. So
I just find that surprising. I feel like if I worked at a company and, how many customers did you have, I guess? Maybe what kind of like revenue are we talking about?
Yeah, I'm thinking, 3,000 to 5,000. Not a lot. I can't, I honestly cannot remember. It wasn't a huge number, but,
I just can't imagine calling the FBI and saying, hey, we got hacked, and having them go, okay, figure it out. Good luck. If they came to help you, it's funny to me.
Well, even at the time, since then, there's been so many huge hacks, when the FBI got involved, even at the time, I was thinking, why are they here? This is such small potatoes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did the FBI have a cybercrime division at that point in time?
They did. Yeah. And the primary FBI agent that was working with us in the course of us telling him, what happened and what we know, and he was taking copies of the database to take back to their lab to do some, diagnostics and analytics on it. We were talking to him about how did you become the cyber crimes person at the FBI. And he was a software engineer that was working with a financial company. I kind of got the feeling he was doing like the trading algorithms at Wall Street. And he said after 9/11, he just got tired of making money for other people and he wanted to do something else. And he joined the FBI. He was a really smart guy.
I wanted to get to how this crime was solved because you guys ended up pursuing it at your company while the FBI was also looking at it, right?
We were sitting around one evening, kind of the people that kind of knew about the crime in some conference room and kind of discussing, trying to figure out why are they stealing the computing power and who was it? The FBI agent wasn't there at the time. He had already taken a bunch of data and taken it back to his office. And somebody came up with the suggestion. So one of the pieces of data that was in the database that had to be inserted in the database to get a functioning account was an email address. And somebody came up with the idea, well, maybe the name in the email is just an anagram. So we reversed the email name, and did a Google search, and sure enough, immediately hit on some Facebook account.
I cannot believe that. So you just sort of guessed that the email address would lead you back to somebody, and you got a hit for that.
Yeah, and so the Facebook account was for a engineering student that was going to school in Texas. I can't remember the university he was at, but one of the universities in Texas, engineering student, and it was obvious from his Facebook account that he was really into Japanese anime. So we ended up, talking to the next day, probably talking to the FBI guy, and we said, I think we know who this person is, and gave him the
But
name, all the information.
could you see what had been done? You couldn't see did you go to the servers that had been compromised and see what programs were on there? Or no, you didn't. Maybe it was all wiped or.
I honestly cannot remember. I can't. We probably did. And I'm assuming that there really wasn't anything on there. We would get fraudulent VMs brought up all the time.
Scott, there's not a lot in what you've said so far that makes me think, wow, I'd be really stoked to be a customer of this company.
Well, what would happen in this case, for all these other fraudulent VMs that were brought up, they weren't via hacking. It was more via, stolen credit card accounts, numbers, and that sort of thing.
Okay, got it.
And so tech support was pretty good at determining what was a VM that was brought up through a, stolen credit card. And who knows what these people are doing? I'm imagining they're up to no good, obviously, if they're bringing up computer, resources with stolen credit card information. But typically there was a pattern, and tech support would immediately figure it out. And the pattern absolutely wreaked havoc for me, because what these people would do is they would immediately spin up the maximum number of servers, RAM, CPU resources. And so whenever this happened, our capacity would suddenly hit the floor, and we'd think we had this whole process that when the VM capacity was getting to a certain point, we'd have to go out and either rack new servers, physical servers, to create more nodes for additional VM servers, or, buy or whatever. So these fraudulent accounts would come up and take up all available space on your nodes, and then you had a capacity problem, but you really didn't, because it's all these fraudulent servers. So that happened pretty regularly. This hack was completely different from that, though.
Was the anime guy setting up new accounts with bogus billing information, or was he actually breaking into other user accounts?
He was spinning up his own servers, but in order to cover his tracks and be able to insert some data that's going to meet the referential integrity of the database, he had to have some billing information. And so somehow he was able to finagle or figure out the structure of the database enough and how it worked that he could spin up his own servers, but send the CPU and RAM time to somebody else's account so that they got billed for it. And I guess assumed that they just wouldn't notice that they're being billed for something.
Did he have to escalate privilege somehow to get into that database, or was it just kind of left open?
Going back to the earlier conversation about how startups work, and you bring up servers and you just kind of install everything by default. There was some admin tool that was installed on some server. I don't even think it was the database server. It was some other server that they were then able to hop to the database server and get into it. And so that's how they, and it was some unpatched admin tool that really should never have been out there. And so that's how they got in. So, I could jump ahead to what happened with this guy and what the FBI actually did.
Yeah, I'm curious. So it's kind of funny to me because you figured out his email address as an anagram. You pass it to the FBI and they're like, okay, cool, we'll look into this. You guys are just like, that's pretty funny. So what happened next then? Yeah, that's what you wanted to tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't remember really what the FBI really did. I don't know if they, I don't know if the information that we gave them and they did a little research on this person, this engineer in Texas, and figured out that, yeah, this is the guy or what have you. But obviously they felt like they had enough information to go to Texas and knock on this guy's door at 7 a.m. apparently one morning. And so they do that. And, and the guy unfortunately lives at home with his parents. So I'm sure his parents weren't happy that a bunch of FBI agents were at the door early in the morning. So that happened. And, after that all happened, the FBI come back and they kind of debrief us on everything that they learned. So the FBI, when they came back from Texas, kind of debriefed us on everything. The young man was part of a anime stealing organization, and apparently they were really into a very specific genre of Japanese anime.
They would just steal there's a particular genre, they would try to steal it.
Yeah, they would steal these anime cartoons off of, I'm assuming, Japanese servers, and they had all of the roles kind of split up again amongst the different people that did this. They had somebody who would find computer resources that they needed to use, and they break into them, and then kind of hand over the server and what the vulnerability is to somebody else. So apparently our server had been broken into, not necessarily broken into, but they knew of the vulnerability with our server for some time. I think it might have been over a year, but they just never had a need to use it until this time. And then there was somebody who would use that vulnerability to steal these anime cartoons off of Japanese servers. They would put it somewhere and make it accessible to other people in the group that knew Japanese and would translate the Japanese dialogue in these cartoons to subtitles, on-screen subtitles.
Wow. So they've got their own production company, but are they making money off this, do you think? Or is it all volunteer? Or did you get a sense did they tell you?
I don't really know. I always kind of felt it was just for the love of anime.
Wow. Just hacked all these servers in order to set up a little production company which steals the stuff and subtitles it and transcodes it, I guess. That's amazing.
I kind of love that.
So once the on-screen subtitles are added, they'd have to re-encode the anime. And that's what our guy was doing. He was using our resources to recode the anime. And then maybe he was also using it as a spot where people could then download it and then watch it and read the subtitles.
When you guys found out about the hack, did you speculate about why somebody would hack you, or did you not even bother because you don't know anybody could be stealing compute? I'm imagining that this result would have been surprising. It seemed like it would have been surprising to me that this is why somebody broke into our system.
Well, I mean, it's just one of those things where you're just once you hear, everyone's just shaking their head like, what? it's to watch cartoons, you kind of think that it's, somebody's doing, I don't know, they're doing, it's part of the the dark web or something like that. And I guess this is part of the dark web in a way, but it's kind of like the light dark web, the lighter version of the dark web.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like you're doing anything malignant, like you're not attacking servers or people or things like that.
Letting having marketplaces where people can buy drugs or whatever.
It's a couple of years too early for Bitcoin mining. So
I was thinking that too. If this happened, 10 years later, people would have spun up servers to do Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Did
So
Did you guys get a little shaken by this though? Because if your customers did know, as we mentioned, or if you weren't sure at the time, like how did this even happen? It may like threaten the entire business, right?
yeah, I think through the interview with this, the FBI interview with this hacker, we determined, he kind of told us how he got onto the server, what the vulnerability was. So, there was a lot of rebuilding of servers, right, from the ground up that we had to do to kind of lock some of the stuff down, which is stuff that, honestly, probably should have done. We should have been doing anyway, since some of these servers were pretty old, and we knew that they were, probably weren't brought up in the best way or most secure way. But the company was trying to compete with Amazon, and they were constantly pushing to put out new releases with new features, and so the ops group was constantly trying to deploy new infrastructure to support a software release or support a new feature, or doing other firefighting. So you never had time to go back. If something was working, you never had time to go back and and make sure it was secure, that sort of thing. And that's how it is with a lot of companies, especially startup companies.
So did it change what you guys did moving forward? Did it change how you, did you guys take security a lot more seriously, or did you have specific practices that came out of that where you thought we better change what we're doing here?
Well, I think as new features are coming up and we were spinning up more servers, we had a lot more eyes on, what was installed, what was, patched, more security. We had some other vulnerability testing done by an outside company, on the front end and the other code. Again, the eye towards better security was there before this happened, but you have so much legacy stuff that you should be patching, that you, like I said, you never get around to, that, that's
and pressure to compete. Yeah.
But anyways, the guy, he had all his computer equipment confiscated by the FBI. I don't know if he, got anything happened to him with his, academic career, if he had any ramifications there. But, he basically just like spilled the beans to the FBI when they were at his house, and turned in everybody in his group. And
oh, wow.
Explained everything about what they did. And if you're a 19, 20-year-old, and the FBI's at your parents' house at 7 a.m. and you're in your pajamas, I imagine that's what you would do.
So there was no indication that they were like stealing customer information, or it was strictly for the video coding.
Strictly for their own anime entertainment, I guess. Yeah. It doesn't look like they're stealing anything else other than computing resources. So in the end, it was nearly a victimless crime in a way, right? I think we even tried to justify. We tried to quantify, how much they took from the company, and I think we added up their RAM usage and CPU usage, and it maybe was like $100,000 worth of RAM CPU usage, which for a small company is a lot, but like I said, in the scheme of things and the hacks that have happened since, or even maybe before, it was probably pretty small.
Do you think they fixed that billing system? You said that billing system was pretty crappy.
Yeah. I wasn't at the company for very much longer after this happened, but I think at this point somebody was working on a new billing system. And I think right before I left, they'd implemented the new billing system, and it was much, much better. Yeah.
Well, I really like the story. I find it a compelling story. I'm glad you came to tell us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's fun to recount. It wasn't all that much fun at the time. But.
Is that why you weren't at the company much longer? It was too stressful?
Yeah, the company, I think at that point, by the time I had left, it was pretty obvious that that Amazon was taking over, and that it was, it wasn't much longer for this company, and they did end up selling to, another provider, or somebody who wanted to get into this space a year or two after I had left. So.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was great having you, Scott.
Well, again, thanks for having me on, and it was kind of fun to see that some old story of mine is of interest.
This has been Scott Aker with us today on Picture Me Coding. My name is Eric Aker. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye, Mike.
See you next time.